The steel target hadn't rung in nearly 30 minutes, and every Marine on the range felt it. The quiet weight of failure piling heavier with each missed shot. Their best snipers were posting 80%, maybe 85% hits at most. And even that felt like luck as the shifting wind licked sideways across the valley and mocked every ballistic chart in their tablets. Captain Rhodes stood behind the line, jaw tight, sunglasses hiding the frustration in his eyes as the sun cooked off the range and made every mistake shine brighter than brass in the dirt. While down the bleachers, a few civilian observers began losing interest, checking phones or laughing nervously as another missed shot echoed silence downrange. That's when a woman in a navy cap stood up near the fence, alone, holding a clipboard and an untouched cup of iced coffee, and said quietly, "Sir, may I try?" And at first no one heard her, or pretended not to, until she repeated it louder, not boldly, not rudely, but with a tone that carried clarity. And Rhodes raised an eyebrow and looked her over, saw a woman in jeans and boots, dusty from walking, not in uniform, no patch, no badge, just a quiet confidence that rubbed some of the younger Marines the wrong way. "This isn't a school tour," he said with a dry grin, but she didn't flinch, just replied, "Neither is what you're teaching them," and that made a few heads turn. A few chuckles slip, but her face didn't change, and something in her tone, calm, deliberate, not arrogant, made Rhodes stop before brushing her off entirely, especially when his spotter leaned over and whispered, "Captain, that might be Tessa Rowan," and Rhodes said, "Who?" And the spotter murmured, "She wrote the 2008 MU wind tables, the classified ones." And suddenly the air changed. Rhodes hesitated, then gestured, half challenging, half curious, and she stepped forward, gently setting her clipboard down like it was heavier than it looked, then knelt beside the rifle on the bench rest without asking for help, adjusted the bipod tension, too tight, like she'd said, and shifted her body with a familiarity that made even the junior Marines watching fall silent. She didn't ask for ballistic data, didn't check charts or apps. She just studied the trees past the targets, felt the flags, narrowed her eyes, then chambered around and breathed so slowly it looked like she might not be breathing at all. Then the first shot cracked, sharp and clean, and a half-second later, a distant metal ping rang back like a bell across the heat haze. Someone near the bleachers blinked and muttered, "Center," and the spotter raised his binoculars and confirmed, "Dead center," and just like that, the mood shifted from amusement to tension, from tension to awe, and by the second, third, and fifth hit, no one was checking their phones anymore, because the steel kept singing, again and again, with each shot spaced precisely, patiently, no rush, no drama, only rhythm. By shot 15, even the seasoned gunners knew this wasn't luck. Her corrections were real-time, intuitive, subtle, adjusting elevation and windage not by device but by feel, like she'd lived her whole life speaking the language of bullet drift and terrain effect. And a whispered question floated through the line. Who trained her? And the answer, "She trains us," silenced the rest. Marines started standing, slowly, some removing their covers in unconscious respect as the count passed 30, 40, 50 with no misses, and Captain Rhodes crossed his arms, jaw clenched, not in anger but in growing humility, because what he thought was a civilian walk-on was now schooling every active sniper on his roster without breaking sweat. Tessa Rowan didn't smirk, didn't grandstand, didn't even look at the growing crowd. She just focused, shot after shot, a ritual of breath and recoil. And by shot 60, someone whispered, "Is this a record?" But the spotter shook his head and replied, "This is a lesson." And it was, because they weren't watching a demonstration. They were watching a standard being redefined, quietly, line by line. By shot 75, even the youngest recruits stood at attention, not because they were told to, but because it felt wrong to slouch. By 85, Marines began muttering aura after each hit, barely audible but growing with each ping. And by 90, even the base commander had arrived, drawn by the whispers, and stood behind the crowd without a word. At 95, Rowan finally paused, not from fatigue, but from discipline, breathing once, checking wind again as a stronger cross-current kicked up. She could have waited it out, but instead, she adjusted, ever so slightly, and fired, and the steel rang again. 96, 97, 98, 99. Then she paused again, this time longer, and slowly turned her head toward Rhodes and said, "Do you still want me to stop?" And Rhodes, voice quieter than before, replied, "No, ma'am. I'd like to see you finish." And she nodded once, adjusted the cheek weld, took a breath, and fired the 100th. Then, without pausing, racked the bolt one more time, fired again, and 101 landed like thunder in that final bell note that rolled across the range, like a flag snapping into full wind. Silence, absolute silence, fell, and no one moved until the base commander stepped forward, saluted, and said, "Master Chief Rowan, I'd like to apologize, and also thank you." And she stood, nodded, and replied simply, "I wasn't here for me, sir. I was here for them," and gestured to the young Marines now staring like they'd seen the horizon open. One of the recruits, barely 20, said softly, "Can you show me how to read the flags like that?" And she smiled, not wide, but kind, and said, "The wind always talks. Most people just forget how to listen." Then handed the rifle back to Rhodes, who now looked at it like it was a sacred object, and said, "I'll remember that." And she replied, "Good, because if they're going to fight wind and bullets, they better start with ego." And with that, she stepped down off the platform and walked back toward the truck she came in, alone, clipboard under one arm, not waiting for applause, not needing fanfare, just carrying the echo of 101 perfect shots across a crowd that would never forget what they'd seen, because every one of them, captain to cadet, had just watched what it looked like when silence spoke louder than rank.